Welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Mindset, Scotland's #1 health, fitness and entertainment. In today's episode, I'm kicking off a new series called the Fat Loss Series. And today is episode 1, which is how to lose fat and keep it off forever. Now, sadly, 90% of people who start a dieting phase or go into a fat loss phase end up gaining the weight in years to come, and very little people manage to keep the weight off. Now, I believe there is one important factor that every single person should put emphasis on, and that's what I go over in today's episode. Now, before we get into today's episode, you've heard this before, you've heard this a million times, but if you're new around here, I release episodes every Monday and Thursday at 6 a.m. Monday's episode typically looks like a solo episode where I dive deeper into a fitness topic, and Thursday I dive deep into the stories of the brilliant minds in fitness, health, business, whatever it may be, and just diving into their story. If you like the content that I do post and you are watching on YouTube, consider leaving a little comment below this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what I'm doing around here, look, I'm on the road to 200 5-star ratings, and I would love it if you could help me get there. It's completely free to do. If you're on Spotify, consider leaving a 5-star rating. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, you can do that as well. So without further ado, enjoy today's episode, and I'll see you guys on the next one. If you're someone who's done more than 5 crash diets, or you're someone that's over the age of 35, I truly don't believe you should go into a fat loss phase for at least 3 months. Instead, I truly believe to see the most success in weight loss or fat loss or changing your physique or just try to feel overall better, you would be better spending your time on getting stronger and improving your lifts inside the gym. Now, this is hand in hand. This goes hand in hand with today's episode, which is going to be a little mini series. I'm going to call this the Fat Loss Series. And today we're going to cover off how to lose fat and how to keep it off. Now, this can be very complex. The messaging in the fitness space, you're going to hear things like calorie deficit. Look, let's be honest, there's a ton of buzzwords. But in today's episode, I'm going to get down into the roots of it so you can better understand how does the body lose fat, first of all, what are some of the best strategies to do, and more importantly, how do you keep it off? Now, fun fact, in 2009, if you remember the Biggest Loser show, now this is where extremely morbidly obese people went on this game show, for example, and it was all about who could lose the most amount of weight. They got assigned a personal trainer, and some of them lost upwards of 100 pounds over an 8-week period. The results of what they'd done within the show was honestly, truly remarkable. It was crazy how much weight these guys had lost. They all improved their health markers. But sadly, I think it was a journalist at the end, followed them up over, I think it was after a 6-year period. And sadly enough, every single one of these guys that had went on the show had gained the weight back on. And it started to, I remember hearing this a couple of years ago. Now, bear in mind, this is what we're talking 8 years ago that this kind of study had come out, or this article came out from this journalist. But I remember hearing this a couple of years ago and thinking, I've never really put much emphasis and thought into, once I've lost weight, what really happens afterwards. And I'm sure most of you guys listening to this, you don't really think about beyond the weight loss journey. We don't think beyond the wedding date, the photo shoot. We just kind of think about that goal, and that is the main driver. Now, it's great to have some of these goals to keep us motivated, to keep us inspired and driving towards something. But a lot of emphasis is, or so much pressure is put on that date that once we get by it, it's like a relief for most people. It's like, it's like the floodgates have opened and we can just sort of get back to what we want to do. And more importantly, one of the biggest reasons why people gain the weight back on is because, one, we'll get onto it. I've got a couple of points we'll run through today, but one, there's no emphasis put on what to do after it. There's no guidance on what to do after it. And yeah, it's almost like you've celebrated the achieving the goal itself. You haven't truly changed anything with your lifestyle, or there's not been any foundations being set of changes going forward. And the most worrying thing about this whole process, and why I've opened up today's episode with the fact of, if you've done 5 or more diets, every time you do a crash diet and you lose a bunch of fat, you lose a bunch of weight, and then you go back to your lifestyle without any fundamental changes, and you gain all this weight back on, your body actually gains more fat, right? You gain more fat stores, and it creates this metabolic adaptation where the next diet you do becomes a little bit harder and the diet after that. So repeating that process time and time again, it just gets harder and harder and harder. And if you're someone that's in their mid-30s, late 30s, over 40, over 50, over 60, this becomes more and more challenging of how stubborn. You hear this thing called, I've just got stubborn belly fat. This is where the process, or where that theme comes from. Your body will get stubborn on letting go of those fat stores. So how do we tackle it? What is the best approach to do? And if I'm being honest, there's not exactly a secret to this. It's really, what is the more appropriate style and what is the more appropriate action to take for your lifestyle. So first things first, how does it work? How does fat loss work? It's broken down into 4 categories, 4 ways that our body will lose fat. There's a lot of emphasis put on fat loss because weight loss is an element with this, but we'll come on to that in a little sec. So within these 4 elements, it feeds into a hierarchy of something called the calorie deficit. Now, I'm sure you've heard this buzzword before. In plain, simple terms, all this means is the amount of calories that you consume, you are burning more than that number. So let's say, for example, you are consuming 2,500 calories and your body's burning 3,000 calories, then you have created what's called a 500 calorie deficit. Now, on the flip side of that, if you're someone who is burning 3,000 calories, but you're eating 3,500 calories, then your body is in a calorie surplus, which can cause weight gain and lead to fat gain as well. Now, the number of 3,000 calories burned is totally individualized. It's very dependent on the person, the lifestyle, the muscle mass, the height, the weight. There's so many factors that go into it. But ultimately, there is a way to work this out, which we'll come on to in a little sec. But before we do that, the way your body breaks down or burns calories is in 4 different segments. We got the first one, which is just resting. To put it simply, this is your resting energy expenditure. So you sit about, lie about the house, your body needs to be burning the fuel that's in your body to keep your heart beating, to keep your liver functioning, just the basic human mechanisms that keep us breathing on a day-to-day basis. So that is an element that we don't really have much control over of how much we can burn. The next one is the one that most of us put focus, time and energy into, and that is the exercise activity thermogenesis. So that is where we jump on a treadmill or we exercise and lift weights in the gym or we do an activity. That is us having control over that wheel. That is the second way we burn calories. The third way we burn calories is it's referred to as NEAT. So you might have heard this as in the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And it basically just means what I'm doing here. I'm moving my hands. I'm very animated. I'm tapping my feet in the ground. You might find that you're a fidgety person. People with ADHD who are constantly rattling, they, believe it or not, will be burning a higher rate of calories than most people because they're so active. Blinking, believe it or not, is a form of this. But in recent years, NEAT is being referred to as walking, and this realistically would go into the category of exercise, but there is an argument that we're trying to increase the movement that we have on a daily basis, standing up, sitting down, all these different things that can kind of play into this. And then the last one is the thermic effect of foods. So if we eat protein, carbs and fats, or just eat any type of food, our body has to digest that, and through that digestive process, our body will burn calories. So going over these 4 things, you can start to understand that how the analogy of our bodies like a car, and the calories becomes the fuel that we put into the car, kind of starts to make a little bit of sense. And this is an analogy I'll probably stick to throughout this episode, and hopefully it hits home, because I know it can be a bit complex and it might take a few run-throughs before it eventually clicks with you. So that is how fat loss starts to work. However, there's an adaptation process that we also need to consider. So if you're someone who has a bunch of weight to lose and you go into increasing your activity, you start lifting weights, you create this calorie deficit, as we mentioned earlier, the longer you stay in that, the more your body adapts to that. Now, there's no rule of thumb for this. What I've saw with clients personally, it's been the kind of 4 to 6 week mark. In some of my older clients, it's been much, much longer, but that is the reason I want to do this episode. I'll come on to that at the end. But as the way your body adapts to this process, if we go through those 4 categories again, we got the resting side of things. So that's where your body's sitting about on a daily basis. Because you're a smaller individual and you might have lost some muscle mass and you've lost body fat, then your body doesn't have to work as hard to keep the heart beating, to keep the liver functioning, and that's simply it. So there's a lower calorie burn from the resting side of things. When it comes to the exercise, particularly if you're doing cardio, your body gets more efficient in using those calories for that cardio activity. That's why I'm a big believer at utilising resistance training, because it's this muscle building signal that gets your body wanting more and gets the building blocks. Something like cardio, let's say on average you burn 700 calories by doing a cardio session. If you keep doing that cardio session over a 4 to 6 week period, by week 6, and this is just arbitrary numbers, but by week 6 your body is more efficient at doing that activity, so it won't burn as many calories, and in return you would burn, 300, 400 calories. So your calorie expenditure, your calorie burn for that activity gets more efficient, it gets easier to do for you. When we come on to the NEAT side of things, so I mentioned this was the one where our bodies are twitching or moving or blinking or just being active, standing up, sitting down. Well, you're less hyper. It's as simple as that. When you look at some of the interesting studies around ADHD, putting them in a calorie deficit is one of the ways they combat the fidgeting, because you have less energy to use, and that's how your body adapts to that one. And the food one is quite simple. The less food you eat, the less calorie burn that's going to be there. The more food you eat, the more calorie burn that's going to be there. But you cannot, it's not, I'll not go into the sciences and the percentages behind that, but the more food you eat, it's never as if your body's going to go for a 1-to-1 ratio. So you eat 2,000 calories, your body doesn't quite burn 2,000 calories just by processing that food. It gets split up through the resting, through the exercise, through the non-exercise, and through the thermic I can't even say that word. The thermic effect of food, should I say. Now, as I said, I don't want to go into the kind of roots of how your body necessarily loses fat, but that is a nice little introductory of the differences on how your body utilises the calorie burn. At the end of the day, all we're trying to do here is create a calorie deficit and start to work backwards from that. Now, most of you guys might have seen a huge amount of success with fad diets, fat loss phases, cutting phases, whatever you want to call it, but you might have had some trouble keeping that weight off, and that's what we're going to come on to in a sec. For you guys who have done fad diets, though, there is a high probability that through that fat loss phase that you've done, or through that diet that you've done, if there's been no emphasis put on lifting weights and there's been no emphasis put on consuming protein, then there's a high probability that you have lost muscle mass. And in fact, you may have gotten a higher body fat percentage. Now, you might think, how on earth can I do this? If I lose 10 pounds, or let's just say an easy number, 5 kilo of weight, if 3 kilos of that came from muscle and 2 kilos of it came from fat, then you have became, from a body fat percentage, fatter. And that's really why I'm a big believer of lifting weights, because if you lift weights, you have a higher chance of retaining the muscle mass that you have. Now, depending on how aggressive your diet has been, that adaptation process, as I mentioned earlier, our bodies are wonderful machines. They are great at responding pretty well to stressful situations. Now, the first time you might get away with. The second time, probably not so much. The third time, this is where your body starts to understand the tricks and the plays of, wow, we've just went from eating 2,000, 3,000 calories on any given day to an aggressive 1,200 calories. We need to kind of hold on to the body's fat stores, because we don't know what this person's going to be doing tomorrow, or we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's really why we see our body getting rid of fat to begin with. So when you are, again, back to the analogy, let's say you need 2,500 calories just to keep your body working out, keep it moving, keep it ticking the boxes, from the food that you eat to the resting that you do, to the movement that you have, to the exercises that you do. That number rounds out to 2,500 calories. That would be what's referred to as your maintenance calories. When you reduce the amount of calories that you have in any given day, so let's say one day you eat 1,900 calories, the next day you eat 2,000 calories, and so on and so forth, how does your body get through. Because if we have a car that is running on empty, it can't really drive as far. Well, think of the fat that you have on your body as a backup tank when it comes to the car that you're driving. Your body will tap into those fat stores and start to utilize that body fat as energy. And that's how you see through a fat loss period or through a dieting phase that an individual will get smaller and they'll see their body lean out, for example. Now, I would imagine listening to this is the goal of every single person that has clicked on this episode or wants to get more of an understanding on, right, okay, I understand that. How do I maximise that? So sorry to interrupt today's episode. I hope you're enjoying the fat loss series so far. Look, I want to kind of put this short little advert in the middle of today's episode. I need a favour from you guys. If you're new around here and you haven't already, if you could leave a 5-star rating on Spotify. I'm trying to get to 200 5 stars. We're about 20 off there, so every 5-star rating can help. It's completely free to do. If you've made it this far in the episode, you should be able to click on the 3 little dots and then just rate. And alternatively, if you haven't already, head over to YouTube and consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. There's going to be much more content posted from me over there in the next coming weeks with weekly vlogs, and you're going to see some challenges that I'll have the future guests to do. So if you could do that, that would mean the world to me. But with that being said, let's get back to this fat loss episode. So now we understand the basics of what a fat loss phase can entail. Let's actually move on to the reason why so many people gain the weight back. Now, it might have made more sense for me to start on the best strategies to lose fat, but I've done a couple of episodes on that in the past. I will revisit that in a future episode, but I think there's many of you guys going through a fat loss phase just now, or you're in a dieting phase, and you're particularly worried how to keep that weight off because it's been blood, sweat and tears for most of you guys. And this is my biggest frustration with the dieting culture. This is my biggest frustration with fat loss phases in general. You may be an individual or a family member, you may have even heard this from a friend, that they're busting their fucking ass off. They are putting in so much effort and energy into trying to truly transform their physique, which is a fantastic pursuit, by the way. They're gaining more confidence, they're getting more energy, they're feeling better within themselves. But then it gets to the end of the program, or it gets to the end of the diet, or just generally willpower and just straight up sacrifice. The person just doesn't want to do it anymore. And they fast forward 1 week, 2 weeks after not being in a quote unquote diet, and they start to see their body dramatically change in a short period of time. Now, that individual that has just put in 12 weeks worth of effort, worth of energy, just committed their whole life to this for 12 weeks, has lost it within 2. How do you think that person feels? They're frustrated, they're angry, but more importantly, they get to the point of, what's the point of this? I'd rather just be fat and happy. And that is the biggest, or that is the saddest thing that I hear from people. That I hear this argument all the time. It's like, oh, why go to the gym? Like, you could do so much other things that are better with your time. Really? Do you think that's why we all go to the gym, to punish ourselves, or we go to the gym to look a certain way? There's many other benefits that going to the gym we can reap from the gym, should I say. But I understand. I truly get it. And we need to do more from a coaching perspective as personal trainers in the space to put more emphasis on the most important and the most overlooked phase in anyone's diet, and that is the post-diet plan. Now, today's episode, we're going to talk more about one strategy within the post-diet plan, which is going to be around reverse dieting. The next episode I'm going to do up with this is probably 7 or 8 different strategies that I see more from anyone who loses weight and successfully keeps it off for years to come. So we'll cover that off in a future episode, but today's focus is going to be on this fancy buzzword called reverse dieting. Now, if you're someone that is only going to work with a coach for 12 weeks and you're going to make a stab at this yourself after the 12 weeks, I would highly recommend that you bring up to your coach that maybe on the last 3 weeks before you finish up, you at least get some guidance and coaching on how to reverse diet for that last 3 week process. Because let's be honest, when the accountability isn't there, when that person isn't in your corner to guide and support you and hold you accountable, it doesn't matter what you do, you're most likely going to kind of drop the ball a little bit and be a little bit more relaxed, which is totally fine. But if we want to kind of keep this weight off forever, then we want to put as much effort into the post-dieting phase as we did the dieting phase. So first things first with the reverse diet, let's start off with the downfalls. If you're someone who is dialed in throughout your prep, you can be really meticulous on your reverse diet that it becomes an unhealthy obsession. Let's be honest. You're still missing out in parties. You're still missing out in events with friends. You're still pretty much restricting yourself and getting so meticulous about every single calorie that goes into your mouth. And it ain't a bad thing, but it definitely can lead to unhealthy behaviours, just as the dieting process can as well. So with the reverse diet in general, you don't have to be too meticulous with balancing out your carbs and fats. In fact, there's a couple of different strategies, and I'll just come on to them in a little sec. To put it simply, a reverse diet is just slowly increasing your calories until you get back up to what's called your maintenance calories. So in the example that we used earlier, 2,500 was our maintenance. When we went into our calorie deficit, we probably brought it down about roughly 500 to 600 calories. So we're down to about 1,900 calories. You run that course for a 12-week period, an 8-week period, or until you reach your results. And then you're like, okay, I'm happy with the weight loss that I've achieved. I'm happy with the fat loss that I've achieved. I now want to get back to just living my life as normal. I don't want to think about this diet. It's consuming too much of my life. It's too stressful on my body, and I've got a lot of things going on in my life that I want to enjoy. So what do you do? Well, the first thing you don't do is just go, right, cool, my diet is finished, I'm just going back to my old lifestyle, because as I said earlier in the episode, you run the risk of, in fact, I guarantee you that if you continue going back to your old ways, you will gain the weight back and some more, and you'll make it harder for your body to lean out in the future, because once you gain some fat, or once you gain fat stores, this is things that sit within the deep tissue within our body fat, that becomes the stubborn belly fat that doesn't want to eliminate, and we don't want that. That's the last thing we want. So what do? You want to spend at least, I would say, 4 weeks on your reverse dieting phase. Now, bear in mind, this is for someone who's coming up to finishing a dieting prep. Some people, it might need to be months. Some people, it might need to be years. But just take a bit of trust in the process. There's a couple of things that you can do to modify this. Okay, so strategy number 1 would be increasing your calories back up to the 2,500. Now, this really depends on the individual, but if you're someone that knows where your maintenance calories were at, then just jump straight back up to that, as long as it's within a 600 calorie increase. Now, that can seem like a big jump for most people, and it can seem quite alarming, but I wouldn't worry too much, because through this process, you can expect to gain a little bit of weight in the scales, but as long as you've got a good bit of focus and energy put onto the training side of things, this isn't a big deal. This is actually a good thing, because your body's filling out the muscle stores that have been depleted for so long, and you might actually start to gain a little bit more muscle, especially if you're starting to gain strength. So rule of thumb for strategy number 1 would be increasing straight back up to your maintenance. Forget the slow gradual increase, which is strategy number 2, and just go straight into it. Maintain that food and hold that for at least a 21-day period to, I would say, up to a month, right? It's an easy way to put it. So for a month, you're being pretty dialed with the calories that you're having. You stick to that number, and you stick to that food. The best strategy is still keeping the same foods that you're having. You're just increasing the volume of that food, so you're feeling satiated. And yeah, it's as simple as that. So while you do that, the thing that you want to complement every part of this process with is changing your focus on trying to burn as many calories and shifting that to getting as strong as possible. Now, strength can mean a lot of different things to many of us. It could be getting stronger in a particular movement. It could be getting stronger on the major lifts. It could just generally be doing the same program, reducing the rep ranges to 6 to 10 and try to get stronger on those exercises that you've been doing. It doesn't really matter, as long as there's more emphasis put on lifting weights. That's all you really want to do. And you want to do this for at least 2, 3 or 4 times within a week. It's whatever really fits your lifestyle. Some of you guys might be 2 one week, 3 the next week, 4 the week after, back to 2. It really doesn't matter. The main thing is that there's a loud muscle building signal from a strength perspective of your body utilising more of that food in your system, because that becomes a fuel that then can be burned and be put to good use. From an activity point of view, I wouldn't put so much emphasis on a ton of cardio. I would reduce if you're someone who's done like hours on the Stairmaster, or you've done hours on the bike and classed it as cardio, and make the switch to steps and assess where your steps are at. If they are upwards of 20,000 steps and you find it quite hard to achieve that, drop them down to 15,000, drop them down to 12,000. It doesn't necessarily matter. What you want to find is that the step count that you have is something that you're mindful of, but something that you can be consistent with, because consistency is the key with this sort of thing. Okay, so that's strategy number one. And just to recap, because I might have went off on a tangent there, you're jumping straight back up to your maintenance number. If you don't know what your maintenance number is, probably roughly about 600 calories more on what your dieting phase has been. Start there, stick with that. Don't be afraid of the scales going up. A strategy might be that, in fact, no, I would still maintain weighing yourself, but don't get too caught up in the scales going up. As long as you're working out consistently, your strength training, then these calories would be put to good use. After a month, once that weight stabilizes out, and this is where maybe for the first time in your life, you're going to experience this wonderful experience of eating more food and not feeling crappy, right? Now, it's important to consume a good, quote-unquote healthy diet, should I say. Although this isn't a dieting part, this is a reverse diet, you still want most of your meals to be balanced with 80% whole foods, right? The 80-20 rule is the best way to kind of approach this. In your dieting phase, you would have had kind of probably select meals. Try and apply that approach to the reverse dieting phase. It just means there's more volume in them. And a sign that you aren't eating enough is if you're still extremely hungry. Now, if I'm coaching you as an individual, there's a difference between hunger and cravings, and that's an episode on itself that we could dive into. But just try and check yourself and understand, right, is this true hunger or is this a craving that I'm having? And if you're consuming a good amount of fruits, veggies, whole food meats, you're hitting your protein intake, then you can probably bet that it's a hunger response if you're feeling that kind of, that feeling in your gut. So that's strategy number one. Now, strategy number two is the gradual increase. So this is where you are on a 1900 calorie deficit. You hit your goal weight, you hit whatever the goal is. Rather than jumping up 600 calories on week one, you can take more of a phased approach. This isn't a bad thing. I've done this with clients. However, looking back at the clients that I've done it with, I'd probably encourage them more to jump up in the spike, because it allows them it allows them to start to modify this new lifestyle. As I said at the start, 90% of people end up failing with their diets or gaining the weight back on in a couple of years. So what we have to think about is that post-lifestyle. What does that look like? So most people will train in a 12-week period. They'll train in their diet, but when the diet's finished, it's like, fuck it, I'm not really that interested in it. So an element of that is like goal setting and all these other different strategies. As I said, that's going to be the next episode in this fat loss series. But this gradual increase is a nice little buff. Now, this works more for the women, right? This works for my girls that I coach, because there is a fear around eating more food, right? I get it. For guys, we do understand that this kind of primal instinct in us that we want to eat hundreds of meat, we eat hundreds of food, and we don't really have too much trouble with over consuming calories. The ladies that I train, there's been so much emphasis from a marketing standpoint that they are more inclined to eat less food. So this means that their process or their post-diet phase of the reverse diet can take much, much longer, because their body can be so stubborn because they've been eating as little calories for X amount of years. So what this would look like, and more likely in a female client, if I take you through one of my more recent clients that I've had, she was in her, for her body to lose fat, which was crazy to think about. It started that she'd been dieting so long, and we worked out her calories from the diet that she was following. It was about 1,200, right? So not a lot of food at all for this individual's lifestyle. So our body was so used to eating 1,200 calories that we had to kind of go into this reverse dieting phase to start with. I'll circle back round to this in a sec. But essentially, her 1,200 calorie diet, to come out of that, her body had to, we didn't want to just chuck a 600 calorie onto that, because when she looked at that number, one, it freaked her out. Mentally, it was a stress. The weight in the scale was going to be an additional stress, and it was just a self-sabotage from week one. So what we done was we increased from 1,200 to 1,400, and we sat there for 3 weeks. On that 3-week process, we weighed ourselves every Monday and Friday. And through that, we got to, I could be in her corner and start to coach her on, right, what are you feeling? And it was always, but the scales went up a couple of pounds, and it's like, right, that's okay. What type of foods are we having? And we built out a meal structure that those 1,400 calories felt pretty good. Now, for me, the only goal, if you're eating as little food as 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 calories, forget about fats and carbs just now. Make sure that you are having at least 1 gram of protein per pound of body fat, or 2 grams of protein per kilo of body fat. So this individual was 60 kilos. We wanted to hit to 120 grams of protein, and that was the goal, right? It didn't matter if we went over 1,400 calories a little bit or just under. We would try to balance that out. So fast forward on our couple of weeks, the bump became another 100 calories. So we went from 1,400 to 1,500. We did try 1,600, but again, this was an individual that was new to working with me. So she still was very nervous of increasing the calories. And I'll talk through the amazing thing that ended up happening. This client's journey does have a fantastic ending, so don't worry, bear with me on this one. So instead of jumping to 1,600, we stayed at 1,500, and we started to work on the tracking element of not necessarily putting emphasis on tracking the food, but tracking the lifts inside the gym and the feeling of energy, right? So morning, midday and nighttime, we started to ask a wee questionnaire of how do you feel energy-wise? And we started to get this little score sheet of green, amber, red. And that was just at 3 points throughout the day over the next 2-week process. And within that, we started to see the reds going from red to amber, and amber going from amber to green. And what this started to do was put more focus on, right, okay, the scale weight might be going up a tiny little bit, but nothing too drastic. However, my lifts are getting stronger in the gym and my energy's actually feeling better. And then she started reporting things like she felt that sleep was getting better, her skin was feeling better, her nails and her hair was feeling better. And this was all through the driver, which I truly believe was the protein element, but also the increase of food. And a bit of a side note here, like back to the analogy of the car, if your body gets more efficient at using the fuel, it's not going to use that backup tank. It's not going to use the fat stores to fuel you. So that's why you're going to feel lethargic. You're going to feel like you don't have any energy at all. And the way we get your metabolism to not necessarily work too efficiently, but get it working better and faster, is by increasing the muscle mass, is by increasing the energy that we need to use. And that is all done through strength training. And I kid you not, through this process, we got this individual slowly increasing their calories over a 6-month basis to where they were consuming 1,900 calories. Sorry, at the end of it was 2,100 calories. And the telltale sign for me was when she was reporting, she's like, look, this is a ton of food. I'm actually struggling to eat this food. I feel good. My sleep's good. My lifts are good. I'm quite happy where I am. So through this process, we managed to quote unquote fix her metabolism, or train her metabolism to be not more efficient, that's not the right word, to be roaring more with the food that she had. Because if she was someone that was from 1,200 calories and just jumped up to 1,900 calories, then her body probably would have rapidly gained weight, because it was so efficient in going, right, we only need to use 1,200 calories, this is our fuel, and that would have been what's called our surplus. So I hope I haven't lost you through that example, but just to kind of recap and highlight the main points, your body can be so stubborn in the weight that it has, and it will be very efficient in the calories that you're using. But if it's very efficient on a low amount of calories, you're not leaving much room for lifestyle. Life is like, if we take the analogy of the 1,200 calorie, or we take the example of the 1,200 calorie client that I've had, you can do that in one meal, easy peasy. So if you eat out for lunch or you eat out for dinner, a 3-course meal puts you way over the 1,200 calories. So you want a body that is efficient in using more calories without gaining weight. And the way we do that is by slowly reverse dieting and making sure there's a big emphasis on strength and an emphasis on consuming the right amount of protein. Through doing this, you can get your body, well, some mad stories that I've had from guys, from girls, even myself, where once upon a time my dieting phase would have been as low as 1,600 calories. I managed to reverse diet my own calorie journey up to 3,800, 3,900, and it then meant when I'd done a future diet, or I wanted to tighten up my physique and lose a bit more body fat, I only had to drop down to 2,900 calories. Do you not think that that's a more appropriate approach than the person who has to jump down to 1,200 calories? And this is the example. This is exactly what happened with my client. When she finished on the 2,100 calories, we ran that course for a couple of weeks. We made sure the weight wasn't sort of fluctuating too much. You can expect a minor fluctuations, but if you look at it, if you track it over a 3-week period, it didn't really gain much and it didn't really lose much. When she went into her first official fat loss phase working with me, bear in mind she'd done so many diets, she'd worked with many different coaches. When we done our future fat loss phase, she was losing fat on 1,700 calories. That is wild. That's 400 calories more than she was previously. That is an extra meal. And this is the fascinating thing about the human body. We need to try and not trick it necessarily, but it only does what we're telling it to do. So if there's in the diet culture, there's so much emphasis put on cut calories, create the calorie deficit, lose weight, and there's no emphasis put on, right, let's get the body ready to lose calories, let's get it primed, let's get it in a healthy position to accelerate and melt the body fat off you. And you can do that with eating more food, and that's the fascinating thing about the reverse diet strategy. Now, more importantly, why I wanted to start this series with the reverse diet is because you can get results like my client, you can get results like I have. If your body's adapted to eating more food and not gaining fat, then you can enjoy life a little bit more. Like, you don't have to worry about eating off plan, or let's say you've got your structured meals. And this is what I found is the best approach for me. I'll have more or less the same breakfast, the same lunch, and I'll change up my dinners from time to time, okay? But for the most part, I'll consume the same amount of food. However, if I've got a friend coming over, or me and Jill are going to go out for a date night, or we have our weekly lunch that we sit down with, then I'm going to eat out, and I'm not going to worry about the calories on that menu, because that eating out side of things, I know my body can handle the spillover of a couple of hundred calories. But the less calories that your body's more efficient with, every calorie has a bigger impact. So if there's an example of a client that's having 1,200 calories, like I said, you can do that in one meal. But if that same client can eat 2,100 calories, they can still go out to dinner and not feel that they have to restrict themselves throughout the day or throughout the week or whatever it may be. Albeit this is my first run through of the fat loss theories, the fat loss series. This one is how to lose fat and how to keep it off. Strategy 1 is going to be reverse dieting. The follow-up episode to this is going to be all the different strategies on those who keep the weight off forever. And it's probably goes more into the psychological behavior, because if I'm being honest, most of us will understand that, okay, we need to make better choices with food, but why do we not do that in the end? So there's only so much we can handle in the environment that we create, but there's much more we can do when it comes to psychological game, when it comes to just overall strategies, what type of meals to have, and that's what I'm going to go into on the next episode. So thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope this gave you more information and more thought in what to do on how to keep that body fat off forever. If you've got any questions, you can find me on Instagram. You can ask me a question at Coach Crossar. If you're listening on Spotify, you should be able to reply to this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below or shoot me an email. I'm going to leave a link to my email below. I forget what it's called. admin@bulletproofcoaching.co.uk. And with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys on the next one.